Like if I'm approaching God a certain way and you're approaching God from a different way, and I feel threatened by that, then I need to take that before the Lord. Like, what plank is there that I need to see in this? Like, why am I holding on to this perspective that I have, in the sense that I feel like if without it, I'm gonna die? Because that's in some ways potentially my identity is attached to that. And I haven't fully let the identity of being in Jesus for me. Yeah. Maybe my sense of affiliation is associated with that. And so maybe I need to let the affiliation of Father, Son, and Spirit, cultivate me. And then I'll have better perspective to see things from.
Yeah. You are listening to Above the Divide with Paula Dannielle. The church has been divided for too long, and we're here to help us come together. This is season 1, where we're talking about having a faithful posture in a politically hostile world. Now, let's jump into today's show and continue to rise above the divide. Hello, and welcome back for this final episode of season 1 of Above the Divide. We have had a great time this season talking about how to have a faithful posture in a politically hostile world. And as we jump into this final episode, we are post-election. At this recording, we don't know if we're post results, but we know we are post election. For this last episode, we have a special guest in the studio that is going to speak to us and help us bridge some of the divides that we've seen over this last year. Above the Divide audience, I am so excited to welcome Pastor David Brown.
Hey, Paula.
Welcome to Above the Divide.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Pastor David is a good friend of mine. We have known each other since 2017 when I moved to Charlotte. And he is a special voice, not just in the city of Charlotte. And I don't say this lightly. You are not just a special voice to the city of Charlotte. You have been a special voice to me in my life, and just a really good friend and a man of impeccable character and a man of God. And so I'm so excited that you are here, David is the senior pastor of A Place at the Table in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is married to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a beautiful woman. I was so excited to finally meet your wife a few months ago. Just as gentle and genuine as I thought she would be. But she's great. How long have you all been married?
18 and a half, almost 19 years now.
Wow. Almost 19 years. And you have 5 girls?
Yeah, 5 girls.
5 girls. 5 girls. That makes 6 women and 1 man in the house.
Yeah. And we do have a male dog now, which is a big deal.
That is a big deal. You feel better?
Yeah, I mean, it's never been something for me that I've fought against or tried to make something of it. For me, I'm just thankful for the ladies that are around me. They are always teaching me about humility and love and kindness. And I'm just, I'm thankful as a dad to be their dad.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So here on Above the Divide, David, we love to open up with games. So no shocker, we're going to do this for this episode. And I've designed a game called Better Together or Pull Them Apart.
Okay.
Better Together or Pull Them Apart. I'm going to give you 2 items, and you can decide if they go better together or if we should forever and always pull them apart. All right. So first item, hot dogs and ketchup.
See, I put mustard on there first, and so I'm going to separate this one out.
Okay.
Because I put on there, if I have to, I can't eat it right now, but what I'll put on there at times are pickles.
Okay. Not relish, pickles.
Pickles? Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like Chicago style. You got celery salt.
Yep.
You put it on a poppy bun, and then some put tomatoes on there. I don't go that far.
Okay.
If I'm down in South Georgia,
yes.
Where I went to college down in Atlanta, I put on just chili with a little bit of onions and mustard on it. But it's just mustard. I don't do the ketchup on it.
Yes. Yeah. The chili, mustard, and onions is a go for sure. In Georgia, I learned coleslaw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't do that, but some do.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
So Atlanta has a place called the Varsity.
Yes.
Varsity.
Yeah. Oh, we love the varsity.
Yeah,
Stand up. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get the slaw on it, you get
That's
the
right.
chili on it, and then that's where I put the mustard. But I learned there not to put the slaw for my preference. But some people just put it all over it, and more power to you. But that's not my thing.
All right. So we're gonna separate it out. Ketchup not needed on a hot dog if you do it right. All right, very good. Bagels and cream cheese.
No, separate it out too.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't have bagels that much anymore, but if I do, if I have, butter, it's fine. Put some salmon on there.
Okay.
And
like a salmon spread?
No, well, yeah, you could do that, I suppose. But I mean, just like they call it lox, right? So putting the salmon on top of that, and just going from there.
David, you are fancy. I just knew for that one you were gonna say keep them together. No, pull them apart.
No, see, my girls, they get it by the tub, and they spread the cream cheese on all of that stuff, and they love it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Dad says separate it. Here is one that is up for dispute in most conversations. Grits and sugar.
Oh man, I can't do that. So growing up, I grew up in East Tennessee. My grandparents were all in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and they would do the slow cooked grits. They would put the butter in it.
Yes.
I didn't even hear about sugar as a thing until I moved. I don't even remember where I moved, and they're like, "Oh, that's kind of like doing the cream of wheat,
right,
with sugar." And I'm like, "No,
no."
So I'll crumble up bacon in there,
yes,
and then put it in there with the butter, and that to me is just that's heaven on earth.
But
that's
we
awesome.
can break apart grits and sugar.
Yeah.
And this is why he's my guy. This is why. Y'all know the people who eat grits and sugar, we're still praying for their salvation.
Totally.
There's redemptive work to be done.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Arizona, but we do grits and butter too. We don't do the sugar. So yeah, I didn't hear about that till I got to the South. Yeah. Y'all, our producer in the studio, Jonah, is looking at me like he has an issue with the grits and sugar. So I'm assuming he would keep them together. Yeah. He would keep them together. All right. One last one. Are we gonna break it apart? Or are we gonna keep it together? Grilled cheese and tomato soup.
Oh yeah. You dip that in there.
Yeah.
It's great.
You got very excited about that. You're like, get together. Let's be together.
So when I was growing up, that wasn't something that was, like a thing.
Okay.
Maybe they would put the grilled cheese next to the tomato soup, but then I thought that was like my discovery when I started dipping it into it.
Okay.
So it was one of those like coming of age things.
It was for me
it was
too.
A coming of age thing.
It was for me too.
When you recognize like, hey, the cheese isn't as melted as you want it to be. And so what you can do, you can put it back in the hot tomato soup. And then
it melts it.
You just keep it in there
so
for a
that
second.
I've never had to do. I did not know that.
Yeah. So.
Okay. I did not do tomato soup until like just the last few years. And I rarely did grilled cheese because I wasn't a bread person. And now I am always down for grilled cheese and tomato soup. I think you're right. It might be a coming of age thing for sure.
Yeah. And there's different things you can do with it. Like typically people press the grilled cheese.
Yeah.
And it's great because you can get the cheese a little bit more melted that way. If you keep it thick like that, this is how they do it down in Texas. Then you put it in the tomato soup and it soaks up more of the soup. And so you're eating it and you've got a completely different texture going on there.
Wow. We have grilled cheese and tomato soup school happening right here on Above the Divide. That's good. There are so many things like this where it really depends on who you ask. If we're going to break it apart or we're going to pull it together. And the grits and sugar one is probably the most hostile that I've ever been in a conversation with. But truth be told, so much in our world is break apart or can it last together?
Yeah.
And especially over the last year and 6 months, a lot of it has been, we have to pull it apart. We have to pull it apart. On this episode of Above the Divide, our goal is really to talk about, do we really have to pull it apart? Is it two parties and two bodies? Or how do we come together and be maybe two parties or more with one body, as we see in Ephesians 4. And so that is our goal for this episode, David. So with that, let me just ask you, In our world where we seem to be so fascinated with automatic pairings, why do you think it is so hard for us to imagine things working together that have traditionally not been able to do so?
Yeah. And so for this topic, we're talking about political parties and perspectives on issues that we really deeply care about.
Yes.
And we care about those things for reasons that become very personal to us, and sometimes for reasons that we're not even sure why.
Okay.
But they can bring about a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, even over these issues, because there is so much energy, there's so much power associated with these things that they can draw our personhood into that stuff. And so, if and I'm coming from this perspective of a follower of Jesus.
Yes,
and that perspective for me is my orientation of all of life. So Jesus to me is the center of everything. He's the one that I can look to for some kind of objective external reference to know if my internal world, which sometimes feels chaotic, is able to be stable and secure and all that stuff. And if I'm approaching an issue involving like politics or something charged like this, and I've been sincerely seeking after what would be wise, what would be generative, what would be kind and loving, and what really also matters in some ways to me personally. Yes. And in that, I discover something of myself and something of what I believe to be God's perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a centering, potentially centering,
correct,
idea and step that I've taken for my own life. And if another person who's sincerely seeking, praying, coming at it from a compassionate, generative perspective and doing a lot of thoughtfulness into it, comes at it from a different perspective and saying, hey, this is what God's speaking to me, then all of a sudden, like, my external reference of reality itself is potentially threatened, right? It's called into question. And so if where I've received my security from, which is in Jesus, looks potentially different than how you're representing Jesus to me, then suddenly maybe I'm not as secure in who he is, and then therefore I can't be as secure in who I am as I would like. And so it's not simply the issue that matters here.
Wow.
But this is talking about now how I find my identity, how I find, my ability to breathe, to find safety, to find a sense of identity. And that can be threatening if I have a tight need for that to be my understanding of God.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
When our perspective on an issue, like we connect it to our perspective on God, it can be threatening.
Yeah. And so I'll use this analogy sometimes when talking about, kind of walk through this. If you talk to someone who has been walking through addiction, and they find their safety and they find freedom from addiction using like 12 steps or using another program like Celebrate Recovery,
right?
They're going to hold on to that process because, man, like otherwise for them, they might die. They might think that, hey, listen, I'm going to go down that pathway again.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very personal to them. It's the same way when we're genuinely seeking after God or seeking after what I think is true about me in a political issue. I hold on to that sometimes because I think that that's going to help provide for me what I think reality looks like and freedom. And if you have a different perspective, you represent a threat to that sense of security. And that's why like denominations exist. Like I got saved in the Baptist church, or I got saved in the Pentecostal church, whatever it might be. And the other church down the road, they're a little weird because they didn't walk it out like the way that I did.
Right.
It's not like they're good or bad or anything like that, but they're just different, and their way can actually threaten, seemingly in my own mind, my security that I have in God, because it's a different pathway than the one that I have walked out.
Is that idolatry?
Yeah, in some form, but it's also understandable, and we can be like gentle with it. Is kind of where I'm going to go with that, because we can understand that, hey, I need to grab a hold of that tightly right now, because that's where I am. And so Paul talks about it in Romans 14, like, hey, listen, if you don't have faith to eat this food, talking about idolatry, like food sacrificed to idols, then don't eat it.
Then don't do it.
But if you've got faith for it, then go for it. So if you've got faith for believing this thing, but I don't, hey, don't divide on it, but recognize that that's a developmental issue that this person's going through right now. And so that gentleness to understand kind of like what has helped me through this might not be where you need to be right now or where you are right now. But a lot of times, some of us, the issue or the need to cling is so right here in our face, we can't see past that.
That's good, is remembering to handle it in such a gentle way that it doesn't divide us. It's just developmental. It's just developmental. That's good.
That's a good way of summing it up. And that's, in that Ephesians 4 passage that we're going to talk about, that gentleness and that humility is how that part of the passage is preceded, so with all gentleness, with all humility.
Well, let's just go to it. Let's go to it. So this episode really hangs its hat on Ephesians 4, verses 4 through 6. And it reads like this. For those of us who, well, actually, I'm going to do Ephesians 4, 3 through 6. All right. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all. David, with Cohesion, the church I'm planning, I call these the list of the 7 ones. And I don't know if I'm coining that. I'm sure somebody else has said that because it's pretty obvious. But there are seven separate things that we're supposed to be unified around. How do you see these things working together?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually add one more verse to it at the very end. And see if we can get some clarity there. So right after that, in verse 7, so after all those ones, Paul says, but grace was given to each of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And so I think all those ones represent the wholeness that God has in mind for all of us, like the full picture.
Yes. Okay.
All right. As I read that next verse, we all have a measure of that we're walking in. Okay. And so it's a portion, it's a partial. Jesus says, what's the kingdom of heaven like? It's like a seed that's planted. And so, you and I right now, we've been given the seed, we've nurtured it, we cared for it, and it's grown to some extent, but it's not the full picture yet for my life or your life. Right. It's true also of all these ones, and so there's one God, there's one faith, there's one baptism, there's one Spirit, there's one Lord. Those ones that are out there, they're true. Yes. But I right now, I only see those in part. I only see those things in measure. Right. And so as we all grow together in unity, the greater measure gradually gets revealed to us. And so to me, this is a question of process and growth. And kind of like we're aiming for that North Star that's out there. We're aiming for that fullness. We're aiming for what Jesus has. But I hadn't yet grabbed a hold of it yet. And so that's where verse 2 is kind of helpful. Like, stay humble, stay gentle in this process with one another, because hey, you've only got some of the picture. You've only got a measure of it. Yeah. And it's interesting later on in the passage, as it goes down, he says, now as we do come together in unity, as we walk this out in Christ, he says the full measure of Christ will form the church. Right? And so that means that, whether you've got, in this context, apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, or you've got Paulas, you've got Davids, you've got all these other folks that are out there, as we come together in unity, then more and more our measures come together, and they provide the wholeness, the fullness that's out there. And,
as we come together in unity, that means we cannot see this wholeness with our divisions.
That's right.
We have to get past. But if division, okay, so now I'm like David. I'm thinking, okay, so if division is a developmental issue, and we can't see the fullness of God without unity, what should we be developing? Is it verse 2 in that chapter that we should be?
Yeah. So so I'm gonna maybe approach this a couple different ways. So Jesus says, if you see a speck in your brother's eye, first learn how to remove the plank in your own. Right. This is a developmental thing, right? So if you learn how to take care of that big issue that is a plank for you, then you'll know how to, walk it out over here. And so first, there's always going to be, well, how does this affect me like personally, like how is this difference awakening me maybe to a different perspective?
Okay.
How is it challenging that tightness that I might be holding on to, like I said earlier? Like if I'm approaching God a certain way and you're approaching God from a different way, and I feel threatened by that, then I need to take that before the Lord. Like, what plank is there that I need to see in this? Like, why am I holding on to this perspective that I have, in the sense that I feel like if without it, I'm gonna die, because that's different than what God says.
Why am I holding on to this perspective so tightly that without it, I feel like I'm gonna die?
Yeah, and
that's good.
I'm heightening the language of it, because no one would say I'm gonna die with that, but we feel that sense of protectionism,
that angst, that urgency.
Yeah, that protectionism over my perspective, because in some ways, potentially my identity is attached to that, and I haven't fully let the identity of being in Jesus for me.
Yeah,
maybe my sense of affiliation is associated with that. And so maybe I need to let the affiliation of Father, Son, and Spirit, cultivate me. And then I'll have better perspective to see things from.
Yeah.
Typically, like I found that the more mature I become in the Lord, the more open I am to all perspectives that are out there. Yeah. I'm not saying that I agree with them all.
Right.
But I'm more open.
But I'm open to listening.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that I've learned how to like take those planks out of my own eye quicker, and typically involves some internal issue that I have. And so maybe it's affiliation, but maybe there's also been a form of affirmation. Maybe I was putting out a perspective and people were agreeing with me and saying like, man, you're a champion of the nation, advocate. And so I start to feel a sense of empowerment.
Yes.
And that's hard to let go of if I'm wrong.
You've named several planks just in that few minutes that I think we don't often think of as planks. Identity, affirmation, and often when we think about planks, we think about like sins of commission, right? We think of drinking or swearing or adultery. We don't think of our identity being a plank. Our affirmation, for our need for affirmation, our group of association being a plank. But you're saying those can be planks.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it involves, again, like our core thing, like look at the issue of abortion.
Yes.
Without, seeing the sides of that, like, people are going to feel like my sense of identity with the Lord is on the line here. Like if I vote different one way or the other, then maybe and it's been said before, maybe I'm not a good Christian.
Right. And so we hear that.
That's exactly. And so these are identity issues. These are issues of whether or not I'm pleasing to God, right? You're not a good Christian if you vote this one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so that gets charged into these conversations at this time of the year, and it brings about that sense of like judgment, that sense of like fear, and a whole host of things are going on with this. And so it involves whether or not I can be blessed by God. Like if I agree with these certain things, if my nation is having these certain laws put in place, can I be blessed? Or I'm going to have a roof over my head, a roof over my connection with God, so to speak.
Yes, because the nation went one way.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. No, you are absolutely correct. You are absolutely right. Wow. And so these identity, affirmation, affiliation these planks, I love that language. Let's call them what they are. These planks are causing our vision to be blurred. Yeah. Not just in how we see God, but how we see each other. Yeah. Which no doubt is causing division.
So maybe, from my perspective of the world, I've sought after the Lord of like, how do I can be generous, compassionate, generous, thoughtful, wise to myself, my neighbor, and all this. And I come to a conclusion it's different than you.
Right.
Then maybe you're the one that has the issue. Maybe you haven't done, and so I'm not saying that's the case, right?
Right.
But that's in our head, in our mind, that'll cause division that's out there. And so saying, hey, maybe I've got a different perspective. Maybe I can grow more, and assume that that's the case. A lot of the times we just say, well, I'm the one that's done the work. I guess you haven't. And so
we can't reach unity without humility.
Yeah, that's where the Ephesians 4:2 starts with that.
Yes.
Like, stay humble in these areas.
Yeah.
Like make space for the person's perspective, even if you don't agree, but don't assume that you're the righteous one here in this case.
Ooh, David. Ooh, that's good. That's good. That's good. That's good.
And so there's an internal power that Jesus wants us to walk in, irregardless of sometimes these issues.
Yes.
And so in Matthew 5:41, he's saying, "Do not resist the evil man." All right, and he's speaking to people that are like highly oppressed in that culture.
Yes.
So if someone strikes you on the cheek,
that's right. Turn the other cheek.
If
they ask for 1 mile, go 2.
Go 2 miles. Right?
Yes.
And like, if you've been oppressed for long enough, you're thinking,
Right.
like, excuse me? Like,
Right.
like, I don't know.
Right.
And so, but what Jesus was conveying is that he had this internal power that was not dictated to him by what was going on externally. So he carried that peace with him. So he would look those folks in the eye and be like, you want me to walk one? All right, how about this? Let me walk two with you.
Yeah.
And they would see this gentleness, this kindness, this humility. And maybe not in that one instant, and maybe it took a few times, but at some point there would be a curiosity, like a pricking of the heart, a change that might happen. It's like, wait a second.
How did they do that?
Like yeah, because like if you're in a position of power, and you find and derive your identity from that plank or that power or that position, then you know that if you don't have that position, then it's going to be threatened, right?
Yes.
And so, but if you see someone not only holding to a different position, but walking it out in gentleness and kindness and a sense of just, man, like there's no weight on their shoulders. They feel, you begin to kind of question that, like maybe my position isn't as strong as I thought it was. Maybe they've got something to offer that I'm curious about now.
Wow.
And so that's that internal world and transformational work that we do internally first helps present options also to others that they didn't know was out there through humility, kindness, and that internal power that God gives to us.
It's very countercultural to try to win people over with humility. But also I would even venture to say it's counterpersonal. Like that is something that takes a divine work of the Spirit.
Yeah.
To even wrap our minds around being able to win somebody who thrives off of power, who may thrive off of oppression, that we can actually win them with humility. But in actuality, that is literally what our Savior did when the centurion said, truly, this is the Son of God.
Yeah.
That is literally what some of our heroes in the faith have done. Yeah. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King Jr. And and that's literally what they have done is win over people who have oppressed them and hurt them and killed them with humility.
Yeah. Well, and so humility to walking it out, it's like in walking out with meekness, you actually have to realize your power. You know, you have to be experiencing that connection with God himself.
Okay. Yeah.
And so for me, like, you know, Jesus said, this is eternal life, you know, to intimately experientially know God in Jesus Christ, the Son of whom we sin. And so whenever there's a rub, whenever there's a place where I'm experiencing, because of difference or divide, something internally unpleasant, that just to me is now an opportunity. Like, hey, there's some area where I can get to know the power of God in my life that I'm not yet. I can get to know his identity, his experience. I can get to know, you know, his affiliation. I can get to know his spirit.
Yeah.
And walk it out the way that Jesus did. Because, I mean, otherwise humility seems like foolishness.
Right.
Not only like,
right.
I mean, it seems like it feels terrible. Like I don't know how you can actually bear under the weight of oppression without having that connection with God, without having to fight back and without having to do it.
I don't know either.
And so if he's asking us to do this, it's only if he's also providing something for us.
Yes.
And so that's what I think, for me as a pastor, that's what I'm jealous for the body, because I see in divisions people selling themselves out and selling out a lesser existence, you know, as they try to hold on to these positions.
Wait, hold on. People selling out for a lesser existence to hold on to these positions.
Yes, as opposed to receiving what's already available to them in the Lord.
That's good.
That power, that fullness, that sense of closeness and intimacy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if Paul's in jail, right, and he's singing songs.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You know, like, let's find that. You know, let's find some inner joy. Like, you know, like, can I find that in the midst of this disagreement and discouragement? And that brings, I think, terror to, you know, the powers and the positions that are out there, to know that, hey, listen, you can't touch me because I'm free already.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. One of the things in this idea of unity and humility, especially when we talk about systems of power and oppression, that I personally have struggled with. And I think on this season, I haven't spoken much personally, but personally, one that I've struggled with is a saying that is well known, especially in Presbyterian circles and Reformed theology, let's broaden the umbrella, Reformed theology circles, is in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, in all things charity.
Yeah.
And I didn't even hear that saying till I moved to Charlotte. But whenever I heard it, the non-essentials that they were saying in non-essentials liberty, then we'll overlook it. We'll go ahead and we can all feel differently about it. Felt like those non-essentials were oppressive essentials. Okay. They were oppressive matters. Okay. How do we navigate a saying used so broadly, quite frankly, to oppress people who don't have the power to say, no, this isn't essential?
Yeah. So there's probably, 3 different ways I'd approach it. Like first, I'd approach it just on the personal level. Okay. So, whatever a doctrine that you might be talking about, and for you that's oppressive, I'd first want to know, all right, like tell me about how that's oppressing you. Okay. Tell me about how that's affecting potentially your relationship with Jesus, potentially how it's affecting your relationship with other believers and Christians. And kind of get through like the plank of it, right? Get to the part where there's an invitation in there until the point where you're experiencing fullness, just purely on your own, right?
Yes.
And before we even tread into the issue, from that place, then my conviction is that you will have wisdom how to walk that out, whether that's to challenge it,
okay,
or whether it's to found something completely different. Because sometimes there's a time to turn the tables, and sometimes there's a time to run away from the crowds. And so, there's at this time of church history, there's so many different options for places that are out there too.
Right.
We're not having to always like change things from the inside, although sometimes that's the call of it. And then let another witness be another witness against that. And so that's how I would address like pastorally. Because once you kind of understand like the internal stuff of what you have going on and how you find peace and wholeness with Jesus, then you can say, hey, all right, what's my calling within this context? Is it to bring about that change and to address those structures, or you're not, and so.
But you can't do that, step 2, until we've dealt with step 1.
Every single time.
The plank. Yeah. Why am I feeling this oppression? Why am I feeling this anger, this angst, this drive? And then what does God want me to do about it? If anything, externally. Yes. It might just be an internal thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and so think of it like this. And so again, I'm not going to try to tread into these issues. I'm not saying this is, even what I'm saying is a right interpretation. But there's scriptures that'll say, wives, submit to your husbands, right?
Right.
And so I remember there was, in a new believers class, I was just going through that scripture in Colossians. And there was a woman that said, excuse me, are you saying that I've got to submit to a man if I'm going to be a follower of Jesus? And I said, well, okay, hold on.
That's the end of class. Okay, hold on. All right.
I said, hey, this is touching something, important to you, isn't it?
Yes.
And she's like, yeah. I mean, like, I left my last husband because he was abusive to me. And I won't get into all of it, but he didn't treat me well at all. So I can't imagine ever submitting to a man again. I'm like, I can understand that.
Right. Based on what she's saying. Yeah.
And so, even within that, like, hey, what's going on internally? Like, there's some healing that needs to be done. And regardless of whether or not, this issue is something that you need to address right now, like, let's deal with that first. And then after that, then we can talk about interpretation of Scripture and was that contextual, or hey, what's our church's stance on this? And hey, how does this work within community, and how does this work potentially with another husband?
Right.
And but if you have that charged emotional, that charged identity, all that stuff that's put in there with that, then like there's no way that you can address these issues until that's taken place. And I often find that just about all folks have unaddressed traumas and victimizations in their life somewhere. And so when we talk about oppression, oftentimes those things that are in there and we haven't yet fully received healing for it. And so if it feels oppressive, then it just reminds me, hey, that reminded me of what I came from.
Yes.
There's no way I can go back to that.
Yes.
And if that perspective that you're that would be presenting is oppressive, well, maybe on the other side of it, for someone else in the church that's on the opposite side of the issue, to change the issue for them would be oppressive. Right? And so think of it like the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
All right, this is one of those big debated issues.
Yep.
All right, if you feel internally out of control, then the sovereignty of God is the one who controls everything. Is going to feel potentially stabilizing.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
However, if you've been abused in the past and controlling people in the past abuse you, the sovereignty of God as he is in charge, but he's not in control, is going to feel a lot more safe for you.
Yes.
But you see how, you if you develop a church around those two doctrines, those are two different churches we're talking about.
Correct.
Here with that.
Correct.
And in certain seasons, that person that feels out of control, you're going to need to have a place that, you know that, hey, God's got your back. God's going to be over all things, and just rest in that. Like, you just need to rest for now. You know what I mean? And so every individual case it's a developmental thing.
Okay.
And so when it comes back now to the bigger issue of politics and racial divides and these kind of things that we're talking about, there's a lot more going on underneath the surface of a person that's holding the position that they are that I'm much more interested in.
Yes.
So this kind of maybe leads to a conversation starter. Like, tell me about your story. Tell me about your history. Tell me about how you've seen Jesus in that. Tell me where you haven't seen him. And I'm much more interested in that, honestly, than how these issues play out.
David, I think that is key, is that your posture is much more interested in the person than the position. And it feels like the way one of the first steps was, yes, humility, but then when we take a posture of being interested in the person before the position, that changes the framework of the entire conversation.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. That's it. Because in the end, all of us are becoming more like Jesus. Yes. All of us are realizing more of our identity in Christ. And I would rather be a friend along the way into that wholeness, as opposed to, trying to create a system or structure to, to help govern things, which is important, but not as important as the individual person that's out there with that. And when we're talking about civic government, every civic government is going to be oppressive in some ways.
Yes.
And there's no way around that.
Yes,
right?
Because people fight for power.
That's right.
Yes.
And it's always a lesser government than God's government.
Yes.
And so, and that doesn't excuse it. We have to speak it out and what those things are. But it's also a reality that's going to be there until the Lord comes back.
Yep.
And again, that doesn't dissuade me from speaking those things. I need to say that again. But it is also reality. There's oppression that's out there.
Yes. Yes.
And that is the end of Ephesians 4 is speaking the truth in love. I think it's in verse 14 or something like that.
Yes.
And so there is a call into doing that, but it's in love. And if you love the position more than the power, that's not true love. The position more than the person, that's not true love.
If you love the position more than the person, that is not true love. Yeah. That is so good. That is so good. That is so good. Let me ask you this. In times like these, some like to appeal to the divisive scenes in the Bible. And they do. Jesus came to bring a sword, not be Jesus turned over tables. How do we balance Jesus' sword and Jesus bringing peace? How can we balance the lion and the lamb? In order to become one body, in order for unity to come to fruition in the church. Yeah,
and that's Jesus knew when his time was to speak those things.
Yes.
He didn't speak those things all the time in every circumstance, every situation. And so, is it your time to say that? And there are things that you need to speak at times like that. But there's also times to remain quiet.
Yes.
And in today's climate, again, this can kind of go different ways. It may not be time for me to speak up, but if I'm silent, then somebody might be saying back to me like, "Well, if you're gonna be silent, then you're part of the problem."
Oh, right. But
I might not be ready for that. But when I am ready, I want to speak those things.
Or you may not see what I'm doing. You just upset because I'm not speaking.
Yeah. That's right. And so, there's like Dannielle in the scripture, he was the king, he was the king's servant over the sorcerers. He was a sorcerer. He wasn't personally practicing that, but he was associated with that.
Correct.
And I'm sure there were some people that are in the community how dare you?
Why wouldn't you say something?
Why would you take on a Babylonian name of another god, serve sorcerers, and still say, how can you tell me that you're walking with God? And so for all of us, like you're alluding to, we might have a hidden call that no one else knows about, that I'm being silent for a reason, but man, with that one person, that one time, in that one situation, I can speak right there. And so in today's culture, I'm sure that there's people that are called to speak out loud, you know, in a big crowd and rally the people, all that stuff. I also know that sometimes, man, that's an easy way to get your identity fixed. That's an easy way to get attention. That's an easy way.
The planks.
It's right there. And so, I mean, that's a way to do it. And it's often far harder to actually remain humble and quiet when all the culture's telling you, you got to speak up, you got to do this. And to know that your mission, your course is just different than what everyone else is saying. So again, there is a time to speak, and there's a context for it. And there's a time when not to.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a movie called Lincoln, and Steven Spielberg directed it. Had Daniel Day-Lewis, Tommy Lee Jones, Sally Field, some others in it. And there's one scene in there that just has stuck me in conversations like this. They're talking about the abolitionist movement, and Tommy Lee Jones' character represents, I believe, a House member that was the main leader of the caucus to help give about abolition for the slaves, but also suffrage. You know, so he was going all the way for it.
Yep.
And he and Abraham Lincoln are having this discussion, and Tommy Lee Jones' character is like, "I know my true north. This is true north. Like, you can't tell me that these people don't have the right to vote. You can't tell me they don't have the right to be free."
Right.
And Abraham Lincoln said, "I have the same compass that you do. Like my true north is that way." But I also recognize as a surveyor in the past that if there's a swamp in your way, you can't keep going true north. Otherwise, you're going to fall into this pit and you're not going to get out of it. And so there's times you have to learn how to walk around this, and it's going to take longer. You have to make sure to avoid this cliff over here. And so there's wisdom in season, and there's, you know, like our true north is what it is. And God is guiding us as a community in part over time to be with the full measure that we're walking in. But it's not always going to look like the straight issue, like the straight arrow we're going to get here like this. And if I want to run this race with endurance and wisdom and kindness, I also have to, you know, follow with the Spirit. Like, what's the Spirit speaking to me today about this? Yes. And I can't put that on you.
No. What is the Spirit speaking to me today about this?
Yes.
And today about this. I think sometimes we get lost in the overarching, what we feel like our life has been called to do, and we forget that moments matter.
Yes.
Moments matter, and moments count.
Yeah.
Moments count.
They do. And sometimes, like, my personal sense of compassion, just as a person, I will want to jump in on an issue because I feel compassion for it.
That's me. That's me too. That's me all day.
And I have gotten exhausted over the years of doing that, you know. And so some years ago, I kind of like hit my point where I was like, man, I can't keep on entering all these issues.
We got to pick.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. Well, all of the prophets didn't speak to all of the things.
That's right.
Even those in the same era did not speak to all of the things.
That's good wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. And God sees all my junk, and he doesn't pick it out every single day and say, it's all right there.
God sees all my junk. Let's deal with it every day. Yeah. I'm so glad he doesn't do that. I'm so glad he doesn't do that. David, I hope, it is my hope and prayer that this conversation has helped someone say, okay, why am I hanging on to this position so tight?
Yeah.
And what is the plank that this position almost is hinged on? What do I need to be looking at in my own eye? What plank do God and I need to deal with, so that there can be more unity in the parts of the body that I influence? Before we close out this episode, do you have a final comment, a final encouragement for our Above the Divide audience? Yeah,
you know, in addressing these issues with our Father, with God, and we hold it personally. We hold these things tightly. He cares so deeply about each of these issues, and he cares so deeply about why you care about this issue. And so I'm not trying to at all present this God as like, hey, like, you know, you got to drop that issue because it's a plank, in that kind of like maybe harsh kind of way. Like, no, he cares deeply. Like, he wants to know why that matters to you. And so as you're approaching him, and hopefully as we are approaching one another about these things, we experience his gentleness. Like, we experience his arm around our shoulder saying, hey, I get that. Like, I really do. Let me heal you. Let me speak gently to you. Let me speak tenderly to you. Let me bring a sense of compassion and understanding, and understand why that's out there for that. Because it's not all because of bad things. Like, we have good intentions why we care about these things. And it's not just because I've got some past trauma, and those things that are there, he really cares why it's there, and he wants to get to it in a gentle, kind way.
Yes.
And so he's patient with us in this process. And so for anyone listening that has had these issues that they're stirring up things and you don't even understand like why sometimes God doesn't answer or it seems like he doesn't care, he really, really, really does. And he's very interested in entering into a conversation with you with tremendous compassion, tremendous empathy, and power for you in that place.
Yes. So good.
Mm-hmm.
We serve a God that cares about the things we care about, but also why we care. And he doesn't just care because he's trying to fix something to get to some eternal end, but he cares because he loves us, because he's compassionate towards us, because he is gentle with us. Mm-hmm. As we go into the rest of this week, whatever the results may have been last week, whether they've been announced or not, Above the Divide wants to encourage you to be gentle with your neighbor, to be gentle with yourself, to take the time to evaluate the speck that might be in our own eyes, whether it's individualism or the need for affirmation, the need to belonging, understanding that really it's the Holy Spirit of God that removes the plank so that we can see and love our neighbor in earnest. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Above the Divide. As always, if this episode has been beneficial for you, click like, click share, click subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you for a concluding comment next week. Mm-hmm. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Above the Divide. Above the Divide is sponsored by Cohesion, a church creating community, unifying the body, and equipping people. If this content is helpful, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone else. We look forward to be together again on Tuesday for our next episode.